Let's talk China. It matters. Quite extraordinary to think that last year we gave China £50 million in foreign aid. Oh, it's OK, we're told, because that's down from 80 million quid the year before. We shouldn't be giving them a single bean. And I think you'll agree with that in just one moment, because a report today issued by Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee has said the following. Without swift and decisive action, we are on a trajectory for the nightmare scenario where China steals blueprints, sets standards and builds products, exerting political and economic influence at every step. Such prevalence in every part of the supply chain will mean that, in the export of its goods or services, China will have a pliable vehicle through which it can also export its values. This presents a serious commercial challenge, but also has the potential to pose an existential threat to liberal democratic systems. Have a think about that, folks. An existential threat to liberal democratic systems. And it runs through business, and it runs through our universities, and it's real, and yet so few people in Parliament dare speak out. I have to say, I thought the wording that was put out by this ISC committee was very fundamental. It's why I said earlier, before the break, this needs to be on the front page of every national newspaper tomorrow. Luke de Pulford joins me. He is Executive Director of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Luke, I mean, this report did not mince its words.
It didn't. It set out pretty clearly that in every area of UK national life, our critical infrastructure, our universities, our investment screening rules, in terms of Chinese overseas espionage through the United Front Work Department, the UK does not have a plan. It isn't so much that we've been asleep at the wheel, it's that we've blindfolded ourselves, got on the back seat and given the keys of the car to China. We have no plan and no strategy to address what we see as, or we're supposed to see, as our greatest strategic threat today, and it's deeply disconcerting.
Universities. Cambridge colleges, in particular, something called the Confucius Programme, which I want you to explain very briefly to people. Tell us about Confucius and universities.
So Confucius Institutes were founded as a way of trying to increase knowledge of China, language exchange, that sort of thing. They find themselves associated with particular universities. And sadly, they've over time become too associated with various organs of the Chinese state, including Chinese embassies. They've become hotbeds of intellectual property theft, of intimidation, of Hong Kongers and others, for example, in the UK. And very worryingly, we haven't really had a plan to deal with that. We did have the UK government say at one time we were going to close them all, like the US has and like other countries have. But then we U-turned on that and said we wouldn't do that after all.
And, of course, Rishi Sunak, when he was running to be leader of the... He didn't win, but he became PM later. He was talking very tough about these institutes, wasn't he? He's U-turned completely.
He was. In fact, it was one of his major campaign promises. He said China was a threat, and he said that he was going to close Confucius Institutes, I believe, on day one of his premiership. Well, he didn't do that. Quite the opposite. He's U-turned on it, and in fact, we found ourselves in a much more friendly posture, diplomatically, towards China, which is, as this report rightly says today, imperiling us.
So, they're infiltrating our universities and corrupting them. They are spying on our industry. They are posing an increasing military threat. They have absolutely fundamentally broken all the promises over Hong Kong. And I mean literally every single promise over Hong Kong. And yet we don't speak out. And I'm going to put it to you that is because there are so many people, retired civil servants, retired senior businessmen, politicians, who frankly are in the pay of China. We have been corrupted by Chinese money.
Well, there's a very interesting part of the report that came out today, which identifies certain individuals who came out of government and ended up being recruited by the Chinese Communist Party or Chinese state-linked institutions to work in very highly paid jobs. So that's certainly true. But I think probably the bigger question for us, and again, this is pointed out by the report, why is it that we are putting trade interests before our values consistently when it comes to China? We have been duped. We have been led down the path of economic promises. This idea that if we hitched our wagon to the Chinese economy, we were going to somehow be able to rescue the UK's economy. has proven...
This was the George Osborne vision, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the Osborne vision is clinging on to its death by its fingernails. That's really put us in a difficult position with China when it comes to Beijing's behaviour. And we find ourselves now, instead of having woken up to this, actually walking back. We've had the high watermark already during the Johnson premiership, believe it or not, of standing up to China. And we seem to be rowing back on that now. And that's really worrying, as the report points out.
Well, I think the potential corruptibility of our ruling classes is a very big factor. I noticed myself, actually, many of the people who were happy to sell us to Brussels are now equally happy to sell us to China, but that's a separate point. But what does interest me, Luke, is this. When you go out into the country, the real country, and you poll attitudes on the Chinese Communist Party, what's happened to the Uyghurs, all these things, you will find a public that really are beginning to wake up to this problem in quite a fundamental way. Poll after poll showing us great concern about the threat that China poses to us. And yet we still go on buying Chinese products, but it's quite difficult, isn't it? You order something online, it doesn't tell you when you buy it whether it's made in China. It's quite difficult to avoid it. But here's the thing. So the public mood is changing. Trump, when he was president, talked a lot on this issue, and I think, you know, whether you like him or not, did raise the level of debate on it. But here's the big question. Whenever this China issue comes up, Ian Duncan Smith gets up and talks about it. One or two others do the same. They found themselves now being banned from visiting Hong Kong or China. Their families banned too. Why, oh why, Luke de Pulford, are there so few members of Parliament talking about this?
Well, I want to make you feel a bit better about that, because the report that was issued today was a parliamentary report, and I think it represents the consensus of Parliament. There are very few people who still want uncritical engagement. There's a tiny little corner of Parliament now. They are obsolete, those guys. It's not so much hawks and doves, it's realists and wishful thinkers. And MPs don't want to be the wishful thinkers. But you're right. Having had these sanctions imposed on a number of politicians, the others know that that kind of thing, that sort of tit for tat, might face them if they are to stand up. Maybe they don't want to do it.
They're scared?
I think that might be the case.
OK, so you think quietly Parliament is moving in the right direction, but it's not making its voice heard?
I think there is no question that with the country, Parliament is waking up. It's just government that's way behind.
Luke de Pulford, thank you very much indeed.